And hello, everyone. We are going to resume our presidential rankings, and this is what we have. We have Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln as the A's, and then we have some B's. And then we go down the list. We have picked up a couple of F's, and those last presidents before the Civil War, they were all pretty ineffective. And our criterion, again, is that we are looking at their overall effect on the country. We're basically trying to eliminate bias of recency and just try to use the historical context of their presidency. But of course, in the overall effect, some of these things do change and have impact even today. We're looking at net positive, negative to the country for our rating. We're going to look at their decision-making process as well as the decisions they made, whether or not they gave hope to the nation during their time. Presidents, that's one thing they have to do. The leader is a dealer in hope. And we're not looking at their personal lives so much unless it affects with their presidency. We're not looking at their history prior or after their time in office. And we are omitting a couple of presidents. We're going to omit one in this bunch, actually, because he was just in office too short a time. And we're also not going to rate President Trump or President Biden, as they are just too recent, and we just don't know what will happen down the road. I try to give it at least 10 to 15 years before I look at rating a president. So let's look at Rutherford B. Hayes, and right here. Hayes is in that C-D area. Could go a number of ways. Let me actually change it because I've been looking at him again. And I could also easily say he's in the D range, and we'll see. He comes in as a result of a very controversial and contested election between himself and Tilden, who was from New York. It's 185 to 184, but 3 states are really controversial in this election. Florida is at the center, very much like 2000. This is an absolute mess of an election. Reconstruction is a big part of the issue, and Reconstruction has been going on, but you're having states come back into the union and into the flow, and they're resisting Reconstruction. It's somewhat controversial. It's creating a lot of problems. The election of 1876 is showing that. The last 3 states that are under Reconstruction are Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. These are going to be the contested states. You have fraud, violence, massive disenfranchisement of Black African-American voters who are freedmen, not able to vote. So no one knows who won this election, although I suspect that Hayes would have won it if all the votes had been counted, since there was such a massive amount of violence and disenfranchisement. So this goes to the House. This is not the first time an election goes to the House or has a contested election. The second election the third election with Jefferson was contested because of a problem with the ballot, where his vice president was actually getting votes for presidency because of the way the ballots were set up. And of course, you had the election of 1820 with Quincy Adams and Jackson and Henry Clay. So the compromise of 77 has worked out. Congress is working this out, and it's a bipartisan committee. They want to try to solve this, who's going to be elected the president. And Hayes actually meets with the delegations of these 3 states. And what he says, I won't run again. I'll be a one-term president. 2, and because he doesn't want to have contention in the nation. 3, I'm going to end Reconstruction in these 3 states. And that, again, was a big part of the problem, was Reconstruction had not ended, and yet you still had a lot of problems. Jim Crow is starting to appear in the South. Whenever Reconstruction left, Jim Crow started to slide back in. So he says, I'll pull these states out of Reconstruction. And the compromise basically of 77 is that the election stands with the unsure states counted in. And Hayes gets a narrow electoral college win over Tilden. And Hayes is a pragmatist in this. He's kind of pragmatic, which is maybe a good trait. He doesn't want this to spiral into having violence, and it very easily could have had a lot of violence involved. Let's look at his presidency, and he's going to show this aspect of his presidency that it's contested, and it's weakened his ability to really lead the nation in some areas, because Jim Crow, he tries to back the civil service reforms that had been brought in by Grant, but he's not really successful in carrying them out. And part of it is that he always has this specter over his back of, how's this going to play out in the South? Reconstruction is pulled back. And since you have the removal of federal troops from the area, this does take away an ability to keep an eye on things and keep things under control and make sure that the Reconstruction policies are followed. So Reconstruction ends, public opinion is against him, and basically the rank and file, even though the congressional delegates accept the compromise, they hate the fact that Hayes is in the presidency. And this makes what's called the Solid South. The South basically is a bloc that is going to resist a lot of the reforms that were made in civil service and in civil rights under Reconstruction, under Grant in particular, because Johnson was just horrible with that. Grant did a very good job actually with that. And it really sets the stage for Jim Crow treatment throughout. He does try to continue the civil service acts, but he's hamstrung. And again, he's meeting with a lot of resistance. There's a railroad strike in 1877. He uses his federal troops to break the strikes, which is obviously very contentious now. The railroads are a vital national industry, and going on strike really could have hamstrung the country also. So his resolution, when it can't be done, is he's going to have the federal troops do that. Other presidents will do similar things, but obviously using the federal troops for domestic issues is a very touchy area. So again, how do we look at this guy? He was really not given a great hand. I don't think Tilden would have done much better, although you might have had some, because he would have probably ended Reconstruction also. And I think, although some of the Reconstruction policies were not very favorable, and I don't think Lincoln would have done some of the harsher aspects that the Congress had brought into effect after Lincoln's death, it was kind of needed to kind of keep an eye on things, and these new gained rights by the freedmen, African Americans, are struck down. So how do we rate this guy? I like his pragmatism. I think the situation really could have been bad. I'm not sure I like the idea that he meets with Congress, who are negotiating this, and kind of makes a deal. I'm going to give him a C-. Okay, and if you give him a D, I fully get it. We go to the next president, and he's one of these ones that looked really like he might have been something good. This is James Garfield. His term is just too short to tell. He runs on a strong campaign of civil rights, and he wants to, again, maybe not put Reconstruction back in, but he's going to use the power of the presidency to make sure that that the rights that Grant had put in the Civil Rights Act, the early Civil Rights Act, is going to be followed. He's also really anti-corruption, and you start happening as industrialism is rising. This real synchronization between business and the federal government, and this corporatism, crony capitalism, really, and he's very much against that. He early makes some movements, but unfortunately, he just doesn't live long enough to see it through. He does sign an act that strengthens free trade, which helps with some tariff reform. He did not like what was happening on the frontier with the U.S. Army, and he was also going to investigate that. This is shortly after the Little Bighorn campaign and the offensive against the Sioux nations and the other nations, Cheyenne nations, in the Montanas and Dakotas. He wanted to look into that and investigate that, and he's shot. He's shot by a political rival. It's not like he's killed by some type of cabal that didn't like his policies because he wanted to change things. He's shot by a rival. He seems to be doing well, and then infection sets in, and he dies he dies shortly after. He only serves a short time, so we are going to give Mr. Garfield, he's also an ordained minister, which is the first time we've had that. He was also an active congressman when elected. we're gonna have to put him in the not rated. I would probably, if his presidency fulfilled on half of what he promised, he would be in the B range. He would have been a pretty dynamic president, but it just doesn't happen. So this brings us up to Chester Arthur. Now, so Arthur has to serve out this term of Garfield. One thing he does is that he's looking at the rest of the world and how the ships that are being built in this time frame of the latter part of the 19th century, and he says the United States Navy is not at all in good shape, and he does a massive update of the Navy, and a Navy is absolutely crucial to the security of the United States. We are separated from Europe. The only way really that large amount of troops or a threat could come is through naval, other than nuclear now, which is different, of course. But really, we have to have a strong Navy to basically keep rivals that are in Europe or Asia using the Navy. That's our first line of defense, and it's a very important one. So he also wants the United States to have more of a presence internationally, and having a Navy is key to that. So he updates the Navy, which again is a very crucial part to United States security. He vetoes the first Chinese Exclusion Act, which is basically to limit the number of Chinese people coming into the United States through immigration. So he does veto that, but he does sign the second one, which is modified. And again, if you are a person who is anti-exclusion, and it's very understandable, it's a real, equality type issue. And it's singling out basically Chinese people. So that is a problem that you could have. He does civil service reform as Grant had started and as Garfield had planned. He takes Grant's model and what Garfield had laid out, and he uses it for his civil service policies, which is a pretty good thing. He also eliminates the spoil system that was happening in contracts with corporations and these large mega corporations. Now you're getting to the phase where corporations are today that they're seen as basically standing as persons, that they actually have the same rights afforded that people do, which is kind of an interesting thing for an entity that's a business proposition to protect investors' wealth. They are given now personal rights in standing, which is something unusual. He is trying to slow that down. He lowers excise taxes, and but he does. His tariff reform raises tariffs, but it lowers excise taxes. So it's a little bit of a turnaround from Garfield's proposal of tariff reform. He does have increased fundings for Native Americans, and as far as the system of their housing, their education, they're trying to alleviate the massive suffering that they go through after their displacement from their tribal lands and the real shellacking that they got at the hands of the United States Army. However, he does not really work on further encroachment on the last remaining sovereign areas of native land, as resources are found there and companies go there, people go, and the people follow to move in. So he's kind of weak on that. All in all, I think that he's kind of a wash. I think that the civil service reform is actually very important, trying to rein in the crony capitalism and corporatism, even with mixed effects. And the building up of the Navy really, just from a strategic aspect, this is vital to the national security, and that he recognizes it. So he's going to go right into that C camp again. We haven't had any D's lately. We might have to look and see who's not quite making the cut. We're going to do one more, and we're going to go to Benjamin Harrison, and he's going to be another one who's going to be kind of a mixed bag. Benjamin Harrison is very much expansionist. He wants, to finish Manifest Destiny, and part of that is he does order the 7th Cavalry, who had been partially destroyed. It wasn't the entire 7th Cavalry that was destroyed during the Little Bighorn campaign, Custer's last stand. It was actually one third of it. Two other like what Custer did is he split his command into 3 task groups, and Benteen and Reno's commands did survive, although they did take kind of a little bit of a beating, but they gave as good as they got. It was Custer's command that was annihilated. But the 7th Cavalry obviously has an infamous aspect because of their whole way that Custer utilized his command in many campaigns, the Washita, the I'm forgetting the name of it, but the year before in the Little Bighorn area, the Rosebud campaign, and then in the Little Bighorn campaign, and then afterwards, the 7th Cavalry kind of just has this negative aura, and other aura being, the myth that they were eliminated, which they weren't. Um, they were rugged, and they were very assertive in their treatment of the Indians during these campaigns. Well, the 7th Cavalry is sent to Wounded Knee, and it ends up in a massacre. He does sign the Sherman Antitrust Act, which is good legislation. Again, he's continuing the policies of Arthur in the Navy, and he tries but fails to extend voting rights in the South. He just doesn't have the gravitas to see it through. Also, by this time, Jim Crowism is entrenched in the South, and it will become the reality in the South for, until at least the 1950s, 1960s, when you have strong pushes for civil rights. So we're going to give our friend Mr. Arthur a C, and there he is. And we have another short-term president that we will start with tomorrow. We're going to cut this one short at 3. So I think we had 3. We had a no-show and a couple of C's. And next up, we'll be looking at McKinley, Roosevelt, who is a important president. Theodore Roosevelt is very important, and Grover Cleveland. I think that's what we'll look at tomorrow or the next time we're on. So thank you. Have a great day.